Do you know what it feels like to be invited by your own children, not for love, not for dinner, not for family, but as nothing more than a babysitter for their dog? That's what happened to me. I thought my son and his wife wanted to spend time with me. Instead, they tricked me into coming over, handed me a list of instructions for their dog, and left for the airport while I stood in their doorway with my suitcase. I was 78 years old, newly widowed, and I thought I still mattered to my family. But to them, I was just free labor. But they didn't know me. They didn't know that inside me was more than hurt. Inside me was a storm. And what they thought would be a little vacation for themselves became the vacation that cost them everything. I remember the phone call as if it were yesterday. It was a Thursday morning, late October, when my son David rang me. His voice was warmer than usual, almost cheerful, and I felt my heart lift a little. Since my husband passed away 2 years ago, David hadn't been around much. He always seemed too busy, his job, his wife Rachel, their social life. I often sat in my little brick house alone, drinking coffee at my kitchen table, wondering if I had become invisible to the world. So when the phone rang and I saw David's name flash on the screen, I smiled. "David. What a surprise," I said, trying to sound light. "Hey Mom," he replied, his tone casual. "Listen, Rachel and I were talking. We'd love for you to come spend some time at our place next week." For a moment, I nearly dropped the phone. An invitation. Not just a quick visit, not just me driving across town to drop off a pie. An actual invitation to stay. "Really?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "You want me to come over?" "Yeah," he said, a little too quickly. "It'd be nice, Mom. Rachel thought it would be good for all of us. You know, to reconnect." Reconnect. That word wrapped around me like a blanket. I had been praying for this, for my family to see me not as a burden, but as someone who still belonged. "I'd love that," I said softly. "Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself," he chuckled. "And maybe an overnight bag. We'll be heading out for a bit, but we figured you could stay comfortable here." Something about the way he said, "heading out for a bit," gave me pause, but I pushed it aside. My heart was too busy filling with hope. That entire weekend, I prepared. Ironed my best blouse, baked a tin of oatmeal cookies, and even found an old board game I thought the kids might enjoy if they stopped by. I imagined sitting around their table, laughing, telling stories, maybe even feeling like family again. On Monday morning, I packed my little brown suitcase. My reflection in the mirror showed a 78-year-old woman with silver gray hair neatly combed into a bun, wearing a soft blue cardigan over a floral dress. My face was lined, my hands marked with years of work, but my eyes shone with something I hadn't felt in a long time, anticipation. When I arrived at their house, Rachel opened the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was dressed in chic black slacks and a cream blouse, her blonde hair perfectly styled. "Clara, hi," she said, her tone a bit too bright. Come in, come in." David appeared behind her, carrying a suitcase. A large suitcase. "Hey Mom. Glad you made it." My smile faltered. "Suitcase?" I asked. "Oh, don't worry about that," David said quickly, brushing it off. "Come inside. We'll explain." I stepped into their house, the smell of fresh coffee and dog shampoo filling the air. Their golden retriever, Max, bounded toward me, tail wagging. I bent down to pat his head, laughing softly. "Well, hello Max. You remember me, don't you?" Rachel glanced at David, and then she handed me a thick stack of papers. At the top was a typed heading, "Dog Care Instructions." My stomach dropped. Rachel clasped her hands together. "So, here's the thing, Clara. We've been planning a little trip. Just a week in Mexico. Nothing too big. But we didn't want to leave Max in some kennel. And then we thought, why not ask you? You love Max." The words blurred in my head. My grip tightened on the paper. "You invited me here, to watch your dog?" David looked at me, his expression stiff. "It's not just that, Mom. We trust you. You know Max better than anyone else would. And besides, it's a chance for you to spend some time in the house, relax a little. Think of it as a change of scenery." I stared at them, my heart pounding. My suitcase sat by the door, filled with hope that had just been crushed under the weight of their deceit. "You didn't invite me to reconnect," I whispered. "You invited me because I was convenient." Rachel's smile tightened. Don't be upset, Clara. You're helping us out, and in return, you get a whole week here. Isn't that nice? Nice. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the papers in her face and walk out. But something inside me stilled. I looked down at Max, wagging his tail innocently. Then back at David and Rachel, who were already checking their phones, barely noticing the way my hands trembled. In that moment, I realized something important. They thought they had played me. They thought they had tricked me into being their unpaid dog sitter. But what they didn't realize was that by underestimating me, they had given me the perfect opening. I tucked the papers under my arm, smiled faintly and said, "Of course. I'd be happy to watch Max." Rachel's shoulders relaxed with relief. David muttered, "Thanks, Mom. We knew you'd come through." They bustled around, gathering luggage, checking passports. I stood silently, my mind already moving like a chessboard. By the time they rolled their suitcases out the door and waved goodbye, I was no longer just a discarded mother. I was the keeper of their house. And soon, I would be the one teaching them a lesson they would never forget. The front door clicked shut behind them, their hurried footsteps fading down the walkway. I stood in the silence of their home, holding the absurd stack of dog care instructions in my hand. For a long moment, I just stared at the list. It was ridiculous. 3 typed pages of feeding times, exercise rules, even commands for brushing Max's coat. Max prefers filtered water, one note read. Another, no snacks unless approved by us. I almost laughed. I raised David, fed him, clothed him, held him when he cried. Now I was being trusted with their golden retriever as though it were the crown jewels. Max wagged his tail, sensing none of the bitterness burning in my chest. I bent down and rubbed his head, whispering, "Don't worry, boy. You're the only innocent one here." I placed the papers on the coffee table and walked through the house. It was modern and sleek, gray walls, stainless steel appliances, polished wood floors. Cold. No warmth, no history, nothing of the homey love Thomas and I had built in our little brick house. Everything here felt staged, as if they lived for appearances. I wandered into the kitchen. On the refrigerator hung glossy photos of their vacations: Paris, Cancun, New York. In each picture, Rachel wore a perfect smile, and David stood beside her, looking proud but tired. I wasn't in a single one. Not even from holidays I had attended. It was as if I didn't exist in their version of family. That realization stung, but it also lit a spark. I opened my handbag and pulled out my leather notebook, the one I had begun keeping ever since Thomas's death, documenting moments I knew I shouldn't forget. I flipped to a fresh page and wrote, November 3rd, invited under pretense. Task, dog sitting while they vacation. 3 pages of instructions. They see me as caretaker, not family. Opportunity, observe, uncover, document. I underlined opportunity twice. That night, I made myself tea and sat by the living room window, watching the streetlights glow. The house was quiet except for Max snoring softly at my feet. I felt like an intruder in my own child's life, but I also felt something else, a strange power. For the first time in years, I had the run of their home. They had trusted me enough to leave me alone here. And I intended to use every second of that trust against them. The next morning, I began to explore. It started innocently enough, opening cupboards to find coffee mugs, checking the pantry for oatmeal. But as I looked around, I noticed patterns. Their shelves were stocked with expensive wines, imported chocolates, and designer coffee beans. Not a single thing looked practical, affordable, or sensible. In the bedroom, Rachel's closet stretched wide, filled with rows of designer dresses, each with tags that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Shoes in neat boxes, handbags lined up like trophies. On David's side, the closet was sparse, a handful of dress shirts, some casual jeans, work shoes. No luxuries. It was clear who set the tone in this house. I pulled open the top drawer of the nightstand. Inside, I found papers, bank statements. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. And what I saw made my lips press into a thin line. Credit card debt. Thousands of dollars. Payments overdue. A second mortgage on their house. They were drowning in expenses they couldn't afford. So that was it. Behind the polished smiles, the vacations, the designer shoes, there was rot. They wanted me here not just for Max, but because they wanted someone to hold down their perfect little facade while they kept running from reality. I closed the drawer, heart pounding. Back in the kitchen, I opened my notebook and wrote, debt, overspending, vacation on credit, appearances matter more than reality, weakness identified. The more I discovered, the calmer I felt. They thought they had tricked me into being a servant. But all they had done was hand me the keys to their empire of lies. By the third day, patterns emerged. Each morning, I walked Max around the neighborhood. He was a sweet dog, gentle and loyal, always looking up at me as if to ask if I was okay. Neighbors stopped me on the street, smiling. "Oh, you must be David's mother," one woman said. "They've mentioned you." "Is that so?" I asked, smiling politely. "Oh yes," she continued. "They said you were coming to help them out. So nice of you." Help them out. So they had told everyone. Not that they invited me. Not that we were reconnecting. Just that I was there to serve. When I returned home, I wrote in my notebook. Perception controlled. Narrative, helping them. Reality, discarded, used. Must shift perception against them. That night, I sat with Max curled at my feet and thought about Thomas. He had always been the patient one, reminding me that revenge doesn't need to be rushed. "Let people dig their own graves, Clara," he used to say. "All you need to do is point out where the hole is." As the flames from the fireplace flickered against the window, I realized, Rachel and David were already digging. All I had to do was be there with the light when the ground collapsed beneath them. The fourth day brought the first real break. I went to fetch laundry from the guest room closet when I noticed a half-open shoebox on the shelf. Inside were receipts, hotel stays, spa treatments, fancy dinners. But what caught my eye was a receipt from a resort in Miami, dated during a time when David told me he had been working late. The name on the receipt wasn't Rachel's. It was another woman's. My hand trembled slightly as I held it. My son. My boy. Anger surged, but I quickly steadied myself. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was leverage. I tucked the receipt into my notebook and scribbled furiously. Affair evidence. Hidden spending. Another weakness to expose. Rachel unaware. For the first time since stepping into this house, I felt something close to satisfaction. They thought they had left me here powerless. But I had already uncovered enough to tear their world apart if I wanted to. And I would. Not yet. Timing was everything. On the last night before they were due to return, I sat in their living room with Max asleep at my feet. The stack of dog care instructions lay on the table beside me, untouched except for a coffee stain on the corner. I looked around at the glossy photos, the expensive decor, the carefully curated perfection. And then I looked down at my notebook, filled with secrets. Debt. Lies. Infidelity. Greed. They had given me a week to care for their house. What they didn't realize was that I had spent that week turning their house into my weapon. As the clock ticked past midnight, I closed the notebook and whispered into the silence. When you come back, David. Rachel, you'll find that the mother you thought was your servant has become your judge. And though they didn't know it yet, their little vacation was about to end in ways they would never forget. The sound of rolling luggage woke me from a light doze. Max barked twice, his tail wagging as he bounded toward the door. I glanced at the clock on the mantel, 9:42 p.m. The week had gone by faster than I expected, though not for the reasons David and Rachel imagined. The key turned in the lock, and the front door swung open. They stepped in, tanned and smiling, smelling of sunscreen and expensive perfume. David dropped the suitcase by the door with a groan, stretching his back. Rachel swanned in behind him, clutching her designer purse, her blonde hair glossy from what I suspected was more salon treatment than sea breeze. Well, she sighed dramatically, that was just what we needed. Clara, you're a lifesaver. I sat upright in the armchair, my leather notebook resting discreetly under the folded afghan on my lap. My lips pressed into what must have looked like a smile. Welcome home. David walked over, patting my shoulder briefly. Thanks for holding down the fort, Mom. How's Max? At the sound of his name, Max barked happily, circling their legs. Rachel bent down, kissing the dog's head, then immediately wiped her lips with a tissue. Oh, Max. You've been such a good boy, haven't you? Her voice was syrupy, practiced. I watched quietly, noting the way David avoided my eyes, the way Rachel seemed more interested in her reflection in the hallway mirror than in thanking me sincerely. You've both had quite the trip, I said evenly. How was Mexico? Rachel's face lit up. Glorious. The beaches, the cocktails. I got the most amazing massage. Didn't we, David? David mumbled, yeah. It was good. Something about his tone told me otherwise, but I didn't push. Not yet. Instead, I reached for my teacup and sipped slowly. I kept everything in order. Max was fed, walked, and well cared for. I also watered your plants. Rachel waved a hand dismissively. Oh, I knew you'd manage. You always do. Honestly, Clara, I don't know what we'd do without you. The way she said it, like I was a convenient appliance rather than a person, tightened something in my chest. After they dropped their bags upstairs, they returned to the kitchen. Rachel poured herself a glass of red wine while David rummaged in the fridge. Looks like you've been comfortable here, Rachel remarked, her eyes glancing around. Comfortable enough, I replied. She smirked faintly, sipping her wine. See, David? I told you it'd be good for her. A change of scenery. I set my teacup down. Yes, it has been enlightening. Neither of them caught the edge in my voice. Or if they did, they ignored it. As the night wore on, Rachel regaled me with tales of the resort, the spa treatments, the fine dining, the people they'd met. David sat mostly silent, scrolling through his phone, nodding occasionally. I listened, my hands folded neatly on my lap. All the while, the words I had written in my notebook hummed in the back of my mind like a low drumbeat. Debt. Affair. Lies. Greed. They thought they had come home to a mother still grateful for crumbs of attention. They thought nothing had changed. But everything had. The next morning, I rose early. The sun streamed through the kitchen window as I brewed coffee and scrambled eggs. It was instinctual, decades of being a wife and mother, providing without complaint. When Rachel stumbled in around 9, her hair messy, she looked at the table with mild surprise. Oh, Clara, you cooked? Yes, I said simply, setting down a plate. She poured herself coffee, took a bite of toast, and said, You really are too good to us. Too good. The phrase stuck in my ears. David entered a few minutes later, buttoning his shirt. Morning, Mom. I studied him closely. He looked tired, his eyes ringed with shadows that a vacation hadn't erased. He kissed Rachel absently on the cheek before sitting down. You two must be catching up on bills now that you're back, I said casually, sipping my own coffee. David froze for a split second before forcing a smile. Yeah, we've got it handled. Rachel glanced at him sharply, then changed the subject. So, Clara, how was your week here? Peaceful. I let my eyes linger on hers a moment too long. More revealing than peaceful. She laughed awkwardly. Well, at least you had Max for company. I smiled faintly. Yes. Max is very loyal. The unspoken contrast hung in the air like smoke. Over the next few days, they slipped back into routine. David went to work. Rachel busied herself with errands, shopping, and calls with friends. I stayed in the house, quietly observing, quietly planning. One afternoon, Rachel left her laptop open on the counter while she took a call in the backyard. Curiosity tugged at me. I shouldn't have, but I did. Emails filled the screen, online orders, travel confirmations, spa bookings. But one message stood out, an overdue credit notice from a bank. The balance made my heart sink. Tens of thousands. I closed the laptop gently, my pulse steady. Another piece of the puzzle. Later that evening, when they were out for dinner, I wrote in my notebook. Debt confirmed. Lifestyle unsustainable. Appearances prioritized. Cracks widening. The notebook was becoming more than just a record. It was my weapon, my shield, my guide. By Friday, Rachel cornered me in the living room. She perched elegantly on the sofa, her wine glass swirling lazily in her hand. Clara, she said sweetly, David and I were talking. We think it'd be nice if you stayed a little longer. Maybe, indefinitely. My breath caught. Indefinitely. She smiled, setting her glass down. Think about it. This house is big. You'd have your own room. And we could use your help, with Max, with the house, maybe even with errands. It makes sense, doesn't it? I looked at her, really looked at her. The suggestion wasn't born of kindness. It was calculation. They didn't want me here as family. They wanted me here as free labor. I'll think about it, I said softly, concealing the storm building inside me. She patted my hand. Good. It'll be easier for everyone. When she left the room, I sat in silence, the weight of her words pressing on me. Easier for everyone, except me. I opened my notebook, my pen carving across the page. Invitation extended for indefinite stay. Motive, exploitation. Response, patience. Revenge must be complete, undeniable, irreversible. That night, as I lay awake in the guest room, I thought of Thomas. I thought of the years we spent building our home, of the sacrifices we made for David. We gave him everything we could, not so he could grow into a man who treated his mother like a maid, but into someone who understood loyalty and gratitude. Instead, I was staring at the ceiling of a house where I was tolerated only for what I could provide. But the thing about betrayal is that it sharpens the edges of the soul. And mine were sharper than ever. I turned my head toward the notebook on the nightstand. Tomorrow, I will take the first real step. Tomorrow, they would learn that the woman they underestimated wasn't just taking notes. She was writing their downfall. The morning after Rachel's indefinite stay suggestion, I woke with a clear mind and a stronger purpose than I'd felt in years. I stood in their gleaming kitchen, sunlight bouncing off the marble counters, and thought to myself, if they see me as the housekeeper, I'll use that role to strip their lives bare. Max padded in, tail wagging, and sat at my feet. Don't worry, boy, I whispered, patting his head. You're the only one safe from me. I pulled out my notebook, flipped to a new page, and wrote at the top. Phase 1, Exposure. I had spent a week uncovering their secrets. Now it was time to use them. The first thread I pulled was small, but effective. Rachel prided herself on appearances. Every Thursday evening, she hosted her ladies' wine circle, half a dozen well-dressed women from the neighborhood who gathered to sip overpriced bottles and gossip about everyone else. That Thursday, I made sure I was in the kitchen, just close enough to overhear. They sat around the dining table, their laughter sharp and polished. Rachel poured glasses of Sauvignon Blanc, her smile wide. Mexico was divine, she gushed. David and I really needed the break. You should have seen our suite, ocean view, champagne on arrival, the works. The women oohed and awed, hanging on her every word. I stood at the sink, rinsing dishes. When one of them asked who looked after Max, Rachel replied casually, "Oh, David's mom. She loves it, honestly. She's happy to help." Happy to help. I dried my hands, then accidentally knocked the stack of care instructions off the counter. The papers scattered across the floor. One of the women bent to help me gather them, her eyes catching the bold heading, Dog Care Instructions. Her brows arched. 3 pages, she said, glancing at Rachel with faint amusement. You actually wrote instructions for your mother-in-law? The room shifted. The women chuckled softly, a few of them exchanging knowing looks. Rachel's smile faltered for half a second before she forced a laugh. Well, you know Clara. She prefers detail. I gave a thin smile and said sweetly, yes, Rachel wanted to make sure I didn't feed Max anything too extravagant while they enjoyed filet mignon in Cancun. The words slid out smoothly, wrapped in innocence, but they landed like darts. A couple of women smirked, and one whispered something behind her glass. Rachel's face tightened. I bent to gather the last sheet, careful to keep my expression neutral. Inside, I was smiling. The next thread came from David's work. That Friday, his boss called the house phone while David was still at the office. I answered. Is this Mrs. Wallace? A clipped male voice asked. Yes, I said cautiously. This is Mr. Taylor from Stanton and Company. I've been trying to reach David. He's behind on his project reports again. If this continues, we'll have to review his position. I paused, then said softly, I'll be sure to remind him. After hanging up, I sat at the table and opened my notebook. Another entry. Career fragile. Weak link, negligence, overextension. Pressure point, job security. That evening, when David returned, he looked worn down. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly mussed. Rachel immediately launched into complaints about the dry cleaning and the lawn service bill. He rubbed his temples. I waited until Rachel left the room, then said gently, "Your boss called." His head snapped up, panic flickering across his face. "What did he say?" "He's concerned. He mentioned reports. Deadlines." David cursed under his breath, slamming the fridge door harder than necessary. "I can't catch a break." I tilted my head. "Perhaps if you spent less on vacations and more on focus." His eyes darted to mine, defensive, but he didn't reply. He stalked out of the kitchen, muttering. I picked up my notebook and underlined the word pressure. The following week, I escalated. On Tuesday morning, Rachel had her wine circle again. This time, I placed the Miami hotel receipt, the one with the other woman's name, on the counter by accident. Folded neatly, but not too hidden. As I brewed tea, one of the women spotted it. "Oh, Rachel, did you go to Miami too? I thought you went to Mexico." Rachel looked up sharply, confusion flashing across her face. "Miami." The woman held up the slip. "This looks like a hotel receipt." Rachel's hand shot out, snatching the paper. Her cheeks flushed crimson. "That's old. Not important." She crumpled it and shoved it into her purse, her laugh brittle. But the looks around the table had already shifted. Eyebrows raised, lips whispered. The seed was planted. I didn't say a word. I simply refilled their glasses with a calm smile, as if nothing had happened. Inside, my heart was pounding. Not with guilt, but with satisfaction. David and Rachel's perfect image was beginning to crack, but I wasn't finished. That weekend, I invited Margaret, my loyal neighbor from my own street, over for coffee. She had been my witness through the years, the one who had driven me home from the gas station the night Richard left me. She was also sharp-eyed and discreet, the kind of woman who remembered everything. She sat with me in their kitchen, sipping coffee from Rachel's fancy mugs, and listened as I explained everything. "They invited me here to watch their dog," I told her plainly. "Not to connect. Not to spend time. Just to use me." Margaret's lips pressed tight. The nerve. I slid the notebook across the table, letting her skim the entries. The debt. The receipts. The care instructions. Her eyes widened. "Clara, you could bury them with this." I smiled faintly. "That's the plan." We agreed quietly. When the time was right, Margaret would be the one to confirm what I had written. She would vouch for me when others tried to dismiss my words as bitterness. Because revenge without proof is just noise. But revenge with witnesses? That's justice. By the second week of my stay, tension had settled into the house like a fog. Rachel was shorter with David. David snapped at Rachel. Their polished facade in front of friends remained, but behind closed doors, cracks were widening. I continued my subtle work, mentioning overdue bills in casual tones, reminding David of his boss's call, leaving little hints around the house for Rachel to find. One evening, she discovered the dog care instructions shoved at the bottom of the trash. "Clara," she snapped, holding the crumpled papers. "Didn't you follow these?" I looked at her calmly. "Max is healthy, fed, and happy. That's all that matters." Her face twisted, but she couldn't argue with the dog wagging happily beside me. She stormed upstairs, muttering. David emerged from his office, looking defeated. "Mom, maybe just try not to upset her." I leaned closer, my voice low but firm. "David, if your marriage depends on controlling me, maybe the problem isn't me." He froze, his face pale, then walked away without a word. I opened my notebook that night, the firelight flickering across the page, and wrote, "Cracks visible. Seeds sprouting. They will implode. All I must do is hold steady." And so, while they thought they still held control, I was weaving the rope they would soon hang themselves with. The trap was nearly ready. And when it sprung, they would never see it coming. By the third week of my stay, the house no longer felt like theirs. Not to me, anyway. Yes, Rachel still strutted through the holes in her designer heels, barking at delivery men and snapping at David. Yes, David still slumped into his home office, eyes hollow from long days at a job he was barely holding together. But to me, every corner of the house hummed with the notes I had written in my leather book. Debt. Affairs. Arrogance. Lies. They had given me a week to dog sit. I had taken a month to dismantle them piece by piece. And now, it was time to draw the net tighter. The first step was subtle but powerful, reshaping how their friends saw them. Rachel's wine circle had grown restless ever since the Miami receipt incident. Whispers followed her laughter, eyebrows arched when she bragged. She didn't notice the change, but I did. That Thursday, when she hosted again, I made sure to set the stage. I placed fresh flowers on the dining table, laid out Rachel's best stemware, and prepared a cheese board. When the women arrived, Rachel preened, convinced I had done it out of gratitude. "Oh, Clara insists on helping," she told them with a dismissive wave. "She needs to feel useful." I smiled sweetly, leaning in just enough for them to hear me murmur, "It's nice to feel appreciated, especially when you're only invited to care for the dog." The silence that followed was delicious. One of the women choked on her sip of wine. Another smirked. Rachel's cheeks flushed, but she quickly laughed, saying, "Oh, she's joking." But the seed was watered again. Later, as I cleared glasses, I let one of the women glimpse the corner of another bank notice sticking out from under a magazine on the counter. She glanced, recognized the red past due stamp, and quickly looked away. I didn't need to explain. Their perfect image was unraveling itself. The second step was more direct. One evening, I called David into the living room while Rachel was upstairs on the phone. I sat by the fireplace, the light casting shadows across my notebook. "David," I said softly, "you've been struggling at work, haven't you?" His shoulders stiffened. "What makes you say that?" "Your boss called while you were away," I said evenly. "He mentioned deadlines. Reports." He swore under his breath, pacing. "I can't keep up, Mom. I've got Rachel on my back, the bills, everything. It's too much." I leaned forward. "David, do you know what happens when people stretch themselves too thin? They break. And when they break, they lose everything, including the respect of those around them." His eyes flicked to mine, anger flashing. "What are you saying?" I sat back calmly. "I'm saying you're letting her drive you into the ground. And when you collapse, she'll simply find someone else to hold up her lifestyle. You think you're her partner, but to Rachel, you're just a wallet. Nothing more." The words hung in the air. His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He left the room without another word. But I had seen it, the hesitation, the crack in his loyalty. And once doubt creeps in, it grows like ivy. The third step was to draw Rachel into a corner. On Saturday, she prepared for a brunch with her friends. She had laid out a cream-colored dress, pearls, and her most expensive handbag. As she was getting ready, I knocked softly on her bedroom door. "Yes?" she snapped. I stepped in, holding a small envelope. This was in the mailbox. I thought it looked important. She snatched it from my hand, ripping it open. Her face paled. Another bank notice, this time a warning about foreclosure if payments weren't made. She stuffed it into her drawer, her hands trembling slightly. "Clara, don't you have something better to do than snoop through my mail?" I tilted my head. "I didn't open it. I just handed it to you. But if you don't want people noticing, perhaps you should be more careful." Her eyes narrowed. "Careful?" I let my voice drop low. "Appearances can't cover everything forever." She glared, lips pressed tight, then turned back to her mirror. But I saw it, the flicker of fear. She knew I had seen too much. And fear was exactly what I wanted her to feel. By Sunday, the tension was unbearable. Rachel snapped at David over every little thing. David avoided her, burying himself in his office. Even Max sensed it, whining at the arguments that simmered behind closed doors. That evening, as Rachel stormed upstairs after another spat, David slumped onto the couch beside me. His hands covered his face. "I don't know how much longer I can do this," he muttered. I laid a hand gently on his arm. "You're right, David. You can't. Not like this." He looked at me, his eyes weary. "What do you mean?" I leaned closer. "If you keep letting Rachel dictate your life, you'll lose everything, your job, your dignity, even your family. But if you take control now, you might still salvage something." He stared at me for a long moment, then whispered, "What do I do?" I sat back, hiding the flicker of triumph in my chest. Wait. Watch. And be ready when the truth comes out. Because the truth was coming. And I would be the one to release it. The final piece came the next day. Rachel had gone out shopping, David was at work, and I had the house to myself. I pulled out my notebook, laid the receipts, the overdue bills, the Miami slip across the dining table. A neat display of their sins. Margaret arrived shortly after, as planned. She gasped softly at the sight. "Clara," she whispered, "you've built a case." I nodded. Yes. And it's time to use it. We sat together, drinking tea, as I outlined the plan. At the next neighborhood gathering, Rachel's precious social stage, I would reveal everything. Calmly, factually, with witnesses. They invited me here to watch their dog, I told Margaret. But instead, they gave me the keys to their destruction. Margaret squeezed my hand. They won't know what hit them. I smiled faintly, closing my notebook with a decisive snap. Good. That's exactly how I want it. That night, as the house settled into silence, I sat by the fireplace, staring into the flames. Thomas's photo rested on the mantel above me. I lifted my glass of tea toward it. You always said revenge should be patient, Tom. Well, it's almost time. Max stirred at my feet, resting his head on my slipper. I bent to rub his ears. Don't worry, boy. You'll always have me. The fire crackled, sparks leaping. And inside me, the fire burned hotter still. Because the trap was set. And in a matter of days, David and Rachel's carefully crafted world would collapse in front of everyone they had ever tried to impress. Rachel had planned her biggest wine circle yet. She wanted to impress her friends with imported champagne and catered hors d'oeuvres, as though another display of wealth would quiet the whispers already circling the neighborhood. She dressed in a sleek emerald dress that hugged her frame, pearls around her neck, her blonde hair pulled into a glossy bun. David, clearly uncomfortable, wore a suit jacket though his tie hung loose, his face drawn. I sat in the corner of the living room, my leather notebook tucked neatly in my lap, Max curled at my feet. They barely noticed me, assuming I was part of the background, as invisible as they had always wanted me to be. But tonight, invisibility was my weapon. The guests arrived in clusters, women in jewel-toned dresses, their husbands in sports coats, all carrying bottles of wine or trays of desserts. The room buzzed with polite laughter, glasses clinking, the scent of perfume and roasted chicken filling the air. Rachel moved gracefully among them, laughing too loudly, complimenting earrings, ensuring everyone saw the catered spread laid out on her dining table. Mexico was divine, she told them again, her voice lilting. We just needed the break, you know? The stress of bills and work, it can be overwhelming, but David and I manage. I felt my lips curve into the faintest smile. She had just handed me my opening. I stood slowly, adjusting my cardigan. Yes, Mexico was divine, I said loudly enough to turn heads. Though I only saw it in the photos they left behind. I was invited here, not to share their trip, not to spend time with family, but to watch their dog. The room stilled. All eyes turned to me. Rachel's smile froze. Oh, Clara, she laughed nervously, you're exaggerating. I stepped forward, notebook in hand. My voice was calm, measured. Am I? They handed me 3 pages of typed instructions. 3 pages. For a dog I already loved. And while they sipped champagne on the beach, I discovered more than instructions. I opened the notebook, letting the pages fall open. Gasps filled the room as I laid the receipts and notices across the coffee table. Debt, I said, my finger tapping the overdue bank statements. Tens of thousands. Credit cards maxed. A second mortgage. All while parading vacations and designer clothes. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Rachel's cheeks blazed red. Clara, that is private. I raised my voice slightly, still steady. Private? Then why leave it in drawers and counters for anyone to find? Why live in a glass house and throw stones? David shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tight. He opened his mouth, but I pressed on. And here, I said, sliding the Miami receipt forward, the one with the other woman's name. A resort booked during the week David claimed he was working late. Not with Rachel. With someone else. The air went razor sharp. Rachel's face crumbled, fury and humiliation warring. Gasps erupted, followed by whispers, louder this time, unrestrained. "Affair?" someone muttered. "All that money, and for what?" another whispered. Rachel turned on David, her voice shaking. "Is this true?" David's silence was louder than any confession. His face sagged, his eyes darting away. She slapped the receipt off the table, her pearl bracelet clattering. "How could you?" The room dissolved into chaos, guests murmuring, Rachel shrieking, David muttering denials. I stood calmly in the eye of the storm, my notebook still open in my hands. When the voices quieted just enough, I spoke again. "They invited me here to use me. To keep their dog safe while they escaped their own crumbling lives. They thought I'd be silent. That I'd be grateful for scraps of their attention." I looked around the room, meeting each set of eyes. But what they forgot is that I am not just a babysitter. I am a mother. A wife. A woman who built her life with honesty and sacrifice. And I will not be erased by greed, arrogance, or lies. Silence. Only the crackle of the fireplace and Rachel's ragged breathing filled the room. Finally Margaret, God bless her, stepped forward. She had been waiting for this moment as my witness. Her voice rang out steady, every word Clara said is true. She has documented everything. She was abandoned, disrespected, and used. And she is stronger than the both of you combined. The murmurs swelled again, this time not against me, but against them. Rachel's friends looked at her with disdain. The husbands shifted uncomfortably. One woman whispered, "Imagine doing that to your own mother-in-law." Rachel crumbled into a chair, face buried in her hands. David stared at the floor, pale and defeated. Their empire of appearances had collapsed in one night. After the guests trickled out, some shaking their heads, others muttering about debts and lies, I gathered my notebook and walked calmly to the door. Rachel looked up, her mascara streaked, her voice a whisper. "Why? Why would you do this to us?" I paused, my hand on the knob. "You did this to yourselves." I only held up the mirror. David finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Mom, I turned to him, my eyes steady. "You left me alone in this house, thinking I was nothing. Tonight, you saw what nothing looks like when it decides to fight back." And with that, I stepped outside. The cool night air hit my face like freedom. Margaret walked me home, her hand steady on my arm. Inside my little brick house, I settled into my chair by the fireplace, Max curled at my feet. Yes, Max. For in their shame and fury, Rachel and David had stormed upstairs during the chaos, slamming doors and hurling accusations, but they hadn't even noticed when I clipped Max's leash and walked him out with me. "He's better off here," I whispered, scratching behind his ears. "Loyalty deserves loyalty." The fire crackled, Thomas's photo above the mantel catching the glow. I lifted my notebook one last time and wrote. Final entry, revenge complete. They lost their dignity, their friends, their secrets exposed. I walk away whole. They are left with nothing but the truth. I closed the book and set it aside, the weight lifted from my chest. For the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. They had invited me to be their dog sitter. Instead, I became their reckoning.